American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
What time is it? Game time!
It's gonna be special. They're gonna talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
Welcome to the American Football Stories podcast. My name is Nick Knudsen. My co-host is Robert Parker III. Today is February 18th, 2021, and we'll discuss what's going on at Texas State, quickly check in on the Michigan Wolverines, and now that we know all the FBS head coaching vacancies have been filled, we'll break down all the new head coaching hires at the FBS level. But, Rob, let's first head down to the Sun Belt Conference, talk a little Texas State Bobcats football. I'm not sure that this is a trend that we'll have to worry about much outside of considering you got a lot of odd stuff going on with the COVID-related eligibility circumstances heading into 2021. Basically, what's going on overall is all the players who played college football in 2020 did not have that season count against their eligibility. And on top of that, they're granted a one-time exception to transfer and play immediately, regardless of whether you're a grad transfer. That usually only apply to grad transfers. So how does this apply to Texas State, and why is this Texas State's a situation interesting? Well, you got a third-year coach down in San Marcos, Texas, by the name of Jake Spavital. And the Texas State Bobcats went through an entire recruiting cycle without signing a high school prospect. This is in the state of Texas, man. State of Texas, you're not signing any high school prospects out of Texas. Rob, did you ever think we'd see the day where that happened?
I tell you what, Nick, I never thought we'd see the day where, even a small school in Texas State can't sign any prospects out of the state of Texas, how big it is, and knowing that football is kind of king. So this is definitely an awkward situation, the first of its kind, for me at least.
Yeah, you would think that a program like Texas State would be built on having great relationships with the Texas high school coaches. And hey, look, I don't know if it's because they couldn't sign, but their take on it is basically, we want to be able to put eyes on guys, and we haven't been able to do that. So I'm going to read here from Andy Staples at The Athletic just to give a little better background on what's going on here. But this is from Staples' article in The Athletic last week, which if you don't subscribe to The Athletic, it's fantastic, especially if you're a college football fan. Great college football coverage, especially Andy Staples, one of my favorite writers. But anyway, Staples says last week in The Athletic on an article he did, the Bobcats, who play in the Sun Belt Conference, already had a 2020 roster dominated by freshmen and sophomores before the NCAA offered an eligibility mulligan for 2020 because of the pandemic. This was a necessary step if the schools wanted a 2020 season. Not offering the eligibility freeze would have incentivized opting out instead of playing. So the schools had no real choice. But the move will have a long tail at nearly every school. In the case of the Bobcats, who are 2-10 last season, and we're going to only have 5 scholarship seniors in 2021, it resulted in a class balance even more lopsided than it already would have been. I think that's one thing that, Rob, that we don't consider. Like, some of these rosters, it sounds like a great idea on paper, but you always hear about all these rules, good, maybe good intentions, but unintended consequences. This is definitely a weird situation where, hey, this is a program that Jake Spavital was heading into his second year last year, he's heading into his third year, heading into 2021. But A lot of freshmen, a lot of sophomores. I mean, they were out offering in the 2020 class, they offered over 100 high school kids and junior college kids. So it's not like this is a program that ignores high school recruiting.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I don't think they're just not offering high school prospects out there. I think they're just offering the prospects that can kind of come in and play right away. And, the transfer portal is one of those things. We talked about it earlier last year in regards to the transfer portal kind of being similar to free agency. And that's what you're seeing right now is giving the chance for, these student athletes to play right away, especially with the new waiver that the NCAA laid down. So I think it's a good approach, but just like Andy Staples said on the back end, your classes kind of be depleted. You only get 25 scholarships every year. So bringing in, a whole class of transfer prospects, that's definitely alarming right there.
You said the key point right there. No matter what, you only get 25 prospects per year. So we saw Staples even pointing this out, like Charlie Weiss at Kansas. Like, if you go too heavy on transfers, then you're missing out on that freshman class. So you could take a bunch of sophomores and juniors, but then when you're not going to have any freshmen in that class, when that comes up, that senior class is going to be light. So it's almost like buying on credit a little bit to some extent if you're doing it on a high value basis, and you're going to pay the price later on that by not having a big class for later. But if this is such a weird situation where you got a class that's loaded at the bottom, like with Texas State, where they're so loaded in their freshman and sophomore classes that they need some of these guys at the top. So it kind of actually makes sense. They take 11 transfers from the portal, and they didn't take a single high school player yet. And I say yet because they can still sign high school players. But Jake Spavital, he made it clear there aren't that many scholarships available. He told Staples, and there's 1 million kids in the transfer portal. So Rob, we always talk about it from a player perspective, right? If you're a Florida Gators fan, and you watch your team play, and a quarterback's not getting playing time, he wants to hit the transfer portal. You're like, oh, cool, where'd he end up? And you usually see where he ends up. But it's not like he goes into the portal and then I'm a high school recruit again, and I got my choice of any school in the books. In part because if you're a college football team, what's been the approach of every college football program forever is to maximize the number of guys you're bringing in, right? So you want that freshman class to be filled up. You want those high school recruits to be filled up. But are we going to see a shift in that with the transfer portal? Are you going to start to see a shift in that? I mean, I still think it's better to get a guy in your program, for 4 or 5 years than it is for 2 to 3. I still think that's a better deal long term. But how do you think we're going to see a change here in the coming years, Rob? You think some programs are going to operate as the 2 to 3 year programs, where others will, with more opportunities for transfers, while others focus on, Alabama doesn't need transfers?
Yeah, I think we might. I think we might see a shift somewhere, especially in the lower tier conferences. Maybe not in the Power 5 so much. I mean, if you're the Alabamas and you're the Clemsons of the world, the Ohio States of the world, you really don't need to go into the transfer portal because you rebuild every year with your high school prospects, with your 4 stars and 5 stars. But if you're a team like Texas State who may not necessarily get those high school prospects, then maybe, the transfer portal is something you use to your advantage. So I think we don't see a complete shift like this where, you have a team just, entering the transfer portal and just getting all of their recruits from the transfer portal. But I do think you see a little bit more teams using the transfer portal to their advantage, at least, for certain positions like the quarterback position and maybe, in the offensive line and the defensive line in the trenches. But for the most part, I think you're going to consistently see, 1 or 2 big time players enter the portal. But other than that, I just really don't see a big shift in regards to the portal.
I was going to say, this isn't a story if it's a normal year, right? With COVID, without all the COVID eligibility and everything. I mean, that's the only reason this is a story right now. We're not going to see this next year.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not. And I tell you what, and I think, the waiver that the NCAA is allowing to actually allow players to come in and play immediately. I think that's why, you're seeing it a little bit more so now than what we have seen before.
one of the points that Spavital made in his case for really explaining himself on this was, hey, look, in a normal year, we're going up against all these Texas schools, Texas, TCU, Texas Tech. And, I mean, let's be real, where Texas State stands right now. This is a program that they're still kind of newer in the FBS ranks compared to all these other schools. They're not the highest one on the list. And in-state, like their list, they can offer. So I mentioned in the class of 2020, they offer over 100 high schoolers and junior college players. You know, they're probably going to work their way down that list before some of the guys that actually are going to come play football in San Marcos. And so his point was, when we get down that list and these guys are like in that medium to bottom range, we're going to want to put eyes on these guys. And with the pandemic, there's been limits on visits and limits on what they're able to do. And they just, it hasn't been the same. So because of the way the roster is constructed, because of the way that Texas State has handled their recruiting in the past, I think he's making it really clear that even though this seems like a creative thing, that he's not trying to make a statement with it.
Yeah, no, I definitely think you're right on that. And just like you mentioned before, you know, you kind of want to recruit players, and just like you said, Nick, you want to put eyes on them. You want to have your scouts out there at the games, you know, seeing what their characters are like behind the scenes, talking to people and seeing what type of not only player they is, but what type of person they is. So, and if that's something that you can't do, and you have the transfer portal that you can take advantage of, where you have film and you have tape, and you can, you know, pick up the phone and give a former coach a call, or give a former assistant coach a call and say, hey, how is this guy on and off the field? I think that's more beneficial than, you know, just sitting back and trying to watch high school film all day and trying to, you know, break down these high school prospects. And I think, you know, that's what Texas State went with.
Right. And a lot different when you're breaking it down and you're sitting in Austin, Texas, wearing a Longhorn shirt. And, you know, pretty much if you want a kid, you could get him, right? Like Texas State, you got to do your homework. You're getting the third or fourth tier guys in the state. You really got to do your homework, because at those schools, it's all about finding gems too. I mean, those guys are like that Sun Belt. We see a lot of great players come out of the Sun Belt, but those guys have interesting paths to those schools. I mean, you could even see some situations like, you know, a school like we talked to Duke Huntley the other night, the running back from Ball State. He talked about the reason he ended up at Ball State out of Atlanta, Georgia, is because they were the only school that stuck with him, because he had some academic issues earlier in his high school career that people thought he wouldn't be eligible. And so he got it together throughout his high school, but they were worried about his eligibility, and a lot of schools dropped him, and Ball State didn't. He's like, they were loyal. I stuck with them. Hey, Ball State could take a chance on a guy like that because they can meet the kid, have some confidence in the kid, and establish a relationship with the kid. Tough to do in a pandemic year, though, right?
Yeah, it really is. And I tell you what, you know, outside of the Power Five and the big top programs that we mentioned before, in your Clemsons, your Notre Dames, your Ohio States, if you don't have the manpower to send your personnel out there to scout, or send your personnel out there to, you know, certain high schools to kind of check out these players, I think you're working at a disadvantage in that regards. So in order to kind of, you know, get back and have an advantage somehow, some way, you just work the transfer portal. And I think this is a great idea, but moving forward, I don't think this is going to be the trend. I think this is just, you know, a one-off because of the pandemic and the type of season that we had this past year.
So Spavital, he comes from Texas State. He comes to Texas State from West Virginia, where he worked under Dana Holgorsen. He had a background. He worked all over Texas A&M, Cal, Oklahoma State, but big connection in there. Dana Holgorsen originally started as a GA at Houston under someone, and Holgorsen was the OC. So good connection to Holgorsen. Holgorsen is the guy that we saw raise some eyebrows last year at Houston in his first season with the Cougars. He left West Virginia for Houston, if you recall. First season, he's got a guy like De'Aaron King. They get off to a slow start. He asked De'Aaron King to redshirt, which De'Aaron King ended up doing, but star quarterback asking the redshirt, but he ended up transferring to Miami. We know that story now. But they did that across the roster. So we've seen with the new transfer portal, and it, you know, in state, a guy he's worked with before. I mean, hey, these are two guys that have worked together closely in the past, and we're seeing two completely different but creative approaches to work within the new rules of the NCAA.
Yeah, I think you're going to, just like I said earlier in that regards, Nick, I think you're going to see this a little bit more, not so much with the Power Fives, but with the smaller conferences. They're going to find those little, nuances and those crooks and crannies to kind of, work through the legality of everything in regards to, grad transfers, the transfer portal, to kind of have a competitive advantage somehow in some way. Because I tell you what, if you're not Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Florida, in that cream of the crop, you're not getting those top tier recruits year in and year out. So you're going to have to go another method. And I think this is what Texas State is doing.
Well, here's the downside of it, potentially. And this is a tweet from Alex Kirshner. The Banner Society guys pointed out this on a Split Zone Duo podcast. Stephen Godfrey, he said Stephen Godfrey brought this up on a recent Split Zone Duo. If you were recruiting so that you could have an up year and then get another job without worrying about what your current program is left with when you leave, this is exactly how you would do that. So do you think ethically, could you see in the future maybe some coaches, maybe there has to be some type of oversight from the school itself, not to entirely put it, maybe the school needs to figure out a way to have some say so that you make sure that one guy is not totally, focused on himself and getting himself a promotion somewhere and, having a great year with a lot of talent and then dipping out and the roster's barren. Like, I think that's an absolute concern.
I tell you what, that's an interesting take. And I can definitely see that happening because I tell you what, if you're a head coach, not only are you coaching for your current job, but you're coaching for your next job. So with that being said, I can see a coach, loading up in the transfer portal and rolling off a couple good seasons, a couple 9-10 double-digit win seasons, and then, taking his talent somewhere else and getting that promotion and just leaving, the cupboard bare for the next coach. I could definitely see that happening. I don't see it happening that much, but I can definitely see it happening. And I don't think this is a situation where this is happening where, the Texas State head coaches say, hey, let me load up on transfer portal guys and run off a couple of wins and have some experience on the team. Just like you said, their team is kind of, freshman, sophomore laden, and they kind of use the transfer portal to gain experience. I can see if it was the other way around, but that's definitely an interesting take on that. So I definitely
don't think that's happening at Texas State.
No,
I think Texas State is using it's like you said, they're gaming it to their advantage, but you can only bring in 25 at a time. So you're leaving 14 spots on the table this year, which they're saying basically they don't have anyway, because they loaded up. Sounds like they did a great job recruiting the last couple of years. But you want to bring in some guys with some experience. I think I saw they're bringing like an offensive lineman from Maine, 3-star quarterback from NC State. That's a Colorado guy originally, wanted to come back out, like leave NC State, comes to Texas State. So, again, we've talked about the impact of the transfer portal on this program before, and it's going to be interesting, man, because I think some of these smaller schools are going to see some of the best players they've ever had, and they're going to be able to assemble. You look at, I believe it's Houston Baptist, the OC, the quarterback, and some wide receiver. They basically took the offense at Houston Baptist, which was explosive at the FCS level last year. And it's Western Kentucky hired them, and they're transferring to Western Kentucky. So you can see like these like mass migrations of not just at South Carolina. Beamer just picked up an FCS wide receiver quarterback duo. Like, so you could see these guys maybe pair up and be like, hey, our team sucks, but if we go somewhere we can beat. And hey, maybe some of these schools like Texas State, but if you want to go at a bigger level, maybe like Purdue and the Big Ten, or like some of these other schools, even look, hell, Florida is struggling to get 5-star kids out of high school. We're constantly seeing guys go to Alabama and LSU, leave the state and everything. It's a frustration for all Florida schools right now. But some of these guys are turning around and coming back after a short stay somewhere else. So with that, all that being said, with the different approaches there can be to roster construction now, if you're a head coach, Rob, are you still trying to I guess it really depends on where you are. But I mean, if you're Nick Saban, you can load up with 4 or 5-star guys that grade out at like what would they have this year, grading out at 95.3 composite or some ridiculous stuff like that. Like if you're Alabama, you're fine doing what you're doing. Clemson, you're fine doing what you're doing. But if you're not one of those upper echelon schools, are we going to start to see a real shift in roster construction? Like if you're Vanderbilt, are you recruiting 15 guys a year and leaving 10 spots open for transfer portals?
I think you have to, depending on your circumstance and your situation. Just going back on this past season, we saw Hugh Freeze and what he did at Liberty with the transfer quarterback from Auburn. So we saw how that worked out. So we're probably going to see that a little bit more. And I know we saw a lot of people kind of hoping the quarterback from Coastal Carolina would, kind of transfer and go to a bigger school to kind of, have his name out there. But I think you're definitely going to see it more so with the quarterback position than any other position, because at the end of the day, you can't play 2 quarterbacks. The old saying, if you play 2 quarterbacks, that means you don't have 1 quarterback. So I think, when it comes to the certain positions where we're talking about the O-line, D-line, and the quarterback, I think you're going to see that roster construction on that particular level with those particular positions. But overall, from the grand scheme of things, I don't think we're going to see this trend moving forward. And I think Texas State is doing it in a sincere way. I don't think they're doing it to beef up the roster, roll off some wins, and then kind of, dip out on the team to look for a new job. I think, they're just working under the circumstances and situations that they have, and working with the NCAA to kind of get those transfer guys coming into the program.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because I think we are on the cutting edge of this. You saw Vanderbilt hire Barton Simmons from 24/7 Sports as essentially, I think he's director of player personnel is the official title, but that sounds an awful lot like GM to me.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's a new concept at the college level. And maybe I'm sure there's guys that have been working, that are recruiting focused and are working to some degree on that level. But I mean, you're seeing, I think Florida State just hired a director of high school recruiting versus like they're going to be director of transfer portal. There's going to be guys that are facing in every different direction. It's about to be a completely different world. And hey, let's add in name, image, and likeness to all this stuff. But hey, in all honesty, man, I think this is better. It makes what Alabama's doing even more impressive, because I think as we go into the future, you're not just going to be able to stack guys and sit them on one roster. Like, I think these guys are going to go out and branch out. I think we're going to see this is going to even out the playing field to some extent. On the other hand, the rich can get richer, because if you're Tulane and you got a great quarterback and LSU needs a quarterback, guess where that guy's playing next year? He's not playing. You didn't get lucky and get that guy for 4 years. He's going to be playing at LSU. So it can work both ways. But it's like we said earlier when we talked about the Tennessee job a few weeks ago. Everyone's talking about all the guys going out. There's a ton of guys sitting there ready to come in too, once they figure out their coaching staff and get that totally set. So I'm fascinated to see how this is going to work. It's adding a whole nother layer. It's essentially free agency, but it's not free agency either, to a point, because I guess instead of having a salary cap, you have a scholarship cap. So not every school is going to have the availability. Like, hey, if you're a 5-star linebacker, you want to come play for the Gators, that's great. Do they have a spot for you though? I'm sure they can find a way to make one, but it's not guaranteed, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the perfect example that we saw, Joe Burrow transferring from Ohio State to LSU. And, the first year that he was playing, he didn't have a really, really good year. He had a solid year, but compared to his Heisman campaign, it was night and day. So technically, LSU had all the pieces around them, and the only thing they needed was that quarterback. So they needed one piece. So when you are the top echelons, the LSUs, the Floridas, the Georgias of the world, you're entering the transfer portal, but you're not looking to build your team. You're looking for 1 or 2 pieces to put you over the hump, compared to these smaller schools where they actually need more bodies. So they're actually trying to construct a team with the transfer portal. portal. So I think that's the difference that you're going to see. You're going to see Clemson, the Georgias, the Alabamas enter the transfer portal, but it's only going to be for one or two players. It's not going to be
spots that they need.
The key spots that they need, because they're racking up, year in and year out throughout high school and getting the 5-star, 4-star guys.
It's going to be harder though. I mean, look, we always openly admit that we are Florida Gator guys, right? Like, what position did Florida not really do well with in the past decade?
The quarterback position.
Yeah. And now Dan Mullen came to town. That got fixed. Kyle Trask, fantastic, great quarterback. I mean, even Mullen did well with Franks too. But Trask took it up, got back to that Gator standard, right? You're not going to see another decade of a quarterback drought. You shouldn't. There's no excuse anymore with the transfer portal, right? And you could say like, well, I remember a couple of transfers that didn't work out so great at Florida, but that was kind of the transfer portal light. Like, what we're in now is a different day and age where I think it's so much more common than it was even more, 5 years ago?
Yeah, definitely.
So don't talk to me about Robert Appleby or, I'm blanking Malik Zaire. Like, you can't talk to me about that, because there's guys out there that are like big time, like 4-star, 3-star, 4-star guys that there's really no excuse. I mean, Miami grabbing Derek King last year. Miami hasn't had a great quarterback in forever. Boom, go out and get Derek King. Quarterback problem solved. So you shouldn't go. Maybe you go a year or two without a good quarterback, but hey, who'd Florida State pick up in the transfer portal this year? McKenzie Milton from UCF, right? Like, so there's going to be no excuse to have like major holes at any big positions anymore. That's going to be fascinating to watch.
And I think that's a great segue for our next topic too, because we're seeing, we saw Joe Milton, the former 4-star out of, Michigan, enter his name into the transfer portal. And that's one thing that's kind of been holding Michigan back is the quarterback position. And they tried to enter the transfer portal and bring in Shea Patterson from Ole Miss a couple years ago, and that didn't work out the way they wanted to work out. Did it translate into wins? Some wins, but not Michigan standard, not competing with Ohio State. But you're right, Nick, to your point. I think it shouldn't be a drought at the quarterback position, especially the way the transfer portal is going in the modern day collegiate era, because I think you have some teams have 2 capable quarterbacks on this roster.
Stay in the Big Ten. What about Indiana? Indiana Northwestern last year. Did Peyton Ramsey work well? I mean, think about how bad Northwestern was in 2019 on offense. Indiana's got a quarterback surplus. Ramsey makes a little jump over to Evanston from Bloomington. Great fit. Perfect fit.
Peyton Ramsey ended up in the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State. I know they didn't win that game, but they competed very well and it was very competitive. So I think if you're, not a top program in the FBS, but you're right there on the cusp and you just want to be competitive and you just want to compete, I definitely think you can compete. You might not come victorious every Saturday, but at least you'll be able to compete. It's not going to be the blowouts that we're normally seeing, the 50, the zeros, the 60s, the 3s scores anymore. I think you're going to see a competitive balance, especially with the transfer portal and all the talent that enters it.
Yeah, college football has always been top heavy. No matter what generation you look at, there's always your 4 or 5 dominant brands at a given time. But you would like to think that some of these schools can figure out part of Michigan's problem. But again, it's like we said, the players are going to be there for you. But if you're Michigan, part of your problem has been not wanting to commit to opening it up. You're Jim Harbaugh. You bring Shea Patterson into into Ann Arbor. You bring Shea Patterson into Ann Arbor, and what do you do with him? You ask him to play smash mouth football? Why? And then even you bring in Gaddis, right? Josh Gaddis who worked with Tua and Hurts, did great at Alabama, comes to Michigan, gets handcuffed. It's clear the guy's been handcuffed at Michigan. So Harbaugh, we'll get to this in a second, but they got to. The puzzle pieces haven't all been put together in the right spots yet. And I think the Joe Milton thing, I actually think this is a positive sign for the Michigan program, because although Milton looks like a freaking stud, we saw him struggle big time last year. So I'll start with this. His Twitter, he put out on Twitter today. I want to thank Coach Harbaugh for giving me that opportunity to come play for a program with lots of tradition. I have bonds with my brothers that will last forever. I've decided to enter the transfer portal as a grad transfer with 3 years of eligibility remaining. So going back on Milton, a little background on Milton, Rob. He was a 4-star recruit, number 11 prospect according to Rivals, 35th best prospect, quarterback prospect, number 11 a few years ago. 35th best prospect in Florida overall and 189th overall nationally. He attended Olympia High School in Pahokee. And you know where Pahokee is. They got some recruits down there. But same high school as DeAndre Francois, Florida State. So appeared in 4 games in 2018, 2019. Great start to open the 2020 season in what we thought was a big win against Minnesota. You know, you remember the internet was calling him the creative player from the NCAA video game. 15-22 passing, 225, 1 TD, 8 rushes, 58 yards, and a TD on the ground. Like I mean, the guy looked great coming out of the bat, and you thought, hey, Michigan might have figured out this offense.
Yeah, I tell you what, the young man had a game that day, and we actually had a conversation about that. I was just like, oh man, like maybe Michigan is back, but you know, every week that we kept watching Minnesota play, we was like, oh well, yeah.
Yeah, we thought Minnesota was a little better
than
they were last year.
Well, maybe Michigan is not back. They just kind of beat up on a not so good Minnesota team, and that's what it pretty much came down to. But yeah, you're right. Joe Milton did look like a creative player. He was getting the Cam Newton, references and everything, after that particular game. So I think, Michigan needs to find its identity. I think that's one thing that you were talking about, Nick, earlier in regards to, the quarterback position. Like Michigan definitely has to open it up. We see Nick Saban, get away from the power run game. He still has the power run game, but at the end of the day, he opens it up and he gets the ball in his playmaker's hand. I tell you what, I can't believe Harbaugh in that offense, the way that they use Donovan Peoples-Jones, throughout his collegiate career. If you just go back and you just watch the NFL Combine and you just see up the athletic ability that he possessed and all the numbers that he put up from the 40, from the vertical jump, the broad jump and everything, you would think this guy would be a stud within that offense, and it just didn't happen. So I really think at this point, Michigan doesn't have an identity, and they're not going to get back to that Michigan standard until they kind of come up with the identity, until they spread the ball out as well. So that's just my take on that.
Well, and Milton, the following week, we saw him throw for 300 yards against Michigan State. But it was, the Spartans come into Ann Arbor. They upset the Wolverines. I watched that game, and Michigan State, that 300 yards was garbage. They gave him a bunch of what was that last drive? They were down by 2 scores, and they had about an 8-minute drive in the fourth quarter because he was just dinking and dunking and taking little shots, and that's all they were doing. So, he throws 2 picks in a blowout loss to Wisconsin, and that's when the season really went off the rails for Michigan. And he got another shot to start against Rutgers, but struggled in that game. We saw Cade McNamara come off the bench and play well, and Michigan survived Rutgers in overtime. But I'm getting this from CycloneReport.com. Early chatter about Milton includes Miami, Florida, and UCF. He's from Florida. Not surprising to see those schools on there, but they think he might go the group of 5 route. I'm telling you, I don't know why they're throwing Florida on this list, because Florida's okay at the QB position for the next few years. And if you're Joe Milton and you're struggling to play at Michigan, don't go to Gainesville. You don't want to be in Gainesville. I don't know. Maybe Gus could use him out at UCF, but I'm not impressed with the guy's arm. I think he's got a big arm, but I think UCF, hey, they're better off getting a kid that's a little undersized that can just rip the ball. I mean, Dylan Gabriel is probably one of the most – if you don't watch UCF football, I highly encourage you to tune in to watch some of Dylan Gabriel in 2021. By the way, UCF Knights, Rob, they opened the season with Boise State in Orlando.
It's going to be a good one.
Oh, that's a great group of 5 game right there. But I wouldn't count out if he's from Pahokee. I mean, FAU, who's coaching there now? Willie Taggart, right?
Willie Taggart.
FIU, Butch Davis. Those some names, man. If you're looking to go play pro ball, like you want to play close to home, get down closer to home. Like, why not? Why not?
And I tell you what, just to jump back in, a lot of these kids coming out of high school, I really think they're getting a lot of bad advice on where to go to school, because if you're a mobile quarterback and you want to go to a particular system in a particular scheme that's going to fit your playing style. And if you're a drop back quarterback, the same thing. So I think another thing that you're seeing in the transfer portal is that, a lot of these players are just ending up in schemes that they're not used to playing in, or that they can't thrive in, because that's because they're not that type of player. And
right.
That's why you see a lot of these student athletes end up in a transfer portal. So I think Joe Milton needs to reassess his situation and go to a school that he's comfortable with from a scheme standpoint, and he's comfortable with, from a family where it's close to home or whatever the case may be. I think he'll be able to get back on track. But we've seen so many quarterbacks in the transfer portal and go to a different school and do fairly well, but playing in a different scheme. So I think that's one thing that these kids coming out of high school need to analyze a little bit better before they sign on the dotted line to a particular university.
Or with the transfer portal, maybe you roll the dice a little more. Maybe you do roll the dice and go, give it a shot.
Yep.
Give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, I'll just come home. I'll go do something else. And that's what some of these schools in Florida, it's always attractive to come home. It's always attractive to come back to Florida. Florida's always a good spot. Like, if kids are from Texas, they want to try Colorado, living in the mountains for a couple of years. Doesn't go well, you come home to Texas, So it could be a little bit of both. But I mean, you're definitely right, because it's easier if you get settled in the right spot. But I don't know. Again, an interesting element that we haven't seen in college football, a totally new element that we're talking about here. So with Milton's departure, and by the way, not the first quarterback to transfer from the Michigan program.
Nope.
Right? We saw Dylan McCaffrey leave to go play for his father, Ed McCaffrey, at Northern Colorado, I believe.
Yep.
And that just happened in the offseason too. Milton's departure leaves a likely starting quarterback battle between redshirt sophomore Cade McNamara, who we saw a little bit of last year, looked okay. I'm not going to go too wild on the guy. I thought he looked okay. He played very well in that game against Rutgers. Our true freshman J.J. McCarthy, number 3 quarterback in the country, Illinois guy, but played in Bradenton at the IMG Academy last year. Another freshman to get hyped about if you're Michigan, but prove it. I'm at a point with the program at some point where it's good to get hyped. I've been a Harbaugh believer from day one. If you told me Jim Harbaugh's tenure at Michigan was going to go like this, I would have been like shocked. I thought he was going to crush it at Michigan. And I think he gets a bad rap to some extent because everyone obsesses over the Ohio State thing, which, by the way, I grew up in the 90s as an Ohio State fan, and John Cooper basically got run out of town for the exact same thing. He had a lot of success, but struggled against Michigan and struggled to win in the bowl games. And that kind of caught up with him after a certain extent of time. And Harbaugh's got probably another year or two following that path before he wears out his welcome. But hey, if McCarthy comes in and it's something where they could open it up, or McNamara's a little better than we're giving him credit for, we'll see. We'll see. But again, what's your identity, Michigan? Just because they say they're going to open it up, they said that the last 3 years and they haven't done it.
And that's what it comes down to. Like, what is your identity? They're not lacking for talent. Trust me. Michigan, they're John Harbaugh, ever since his tenure, his first year there, they've been getting the top recruits in. They've been getting the Rashawn Garys, they've been getting the Jabril Peppers, the top tier talent that's coming from that area. And they've actually been going to other states, Florida, they've been going to California, Texas, and getting players as well. Mm-hmm. So it's not a lack of, their losses is sure not from a lack of talent. I think it's more so with the coaching and the identity, what Michigan is going to do. And because we know Ohio State's identity, we know Alabama's identity, we know Clemson's identity, but we don't know Michigan identity. I think that's what it boils down to. So until Jim Harbaugh can kind of figure that out, I think this Michigan fan base is going to be tugging on, they're closed for a while until Harbaugh figures this thing out.
Well, the tugging has begun because there's only, I think I counted 4 coaches that are holdovers from the previous staff. This is from Detroit Free Press. Josh Gaddis, Jay Harbaugh, Moore, Nua, and G. 5 coaches are holdovers from the previous staff. So, and even shifting around in responsibilities on what to do, they brought in former players. Ron Bellamy's going to coach the wide receivers with Gaddis. Mike Hart's going to coach the running backs. But the defense had a complete shift too, with I believe Mike McDonald out of Baltimore for the Ravens comes over. Connection there with Brother John. You got to think Brother John's. Is he thrilled about that? Was he the linebackers coach? Or was he the linebackers coach with the Ravens?
If I can recall, I think he was. Yep.
Yeah. So McDonald comes over from the Ravens to take the DC job. Defensive line, Sean Nua, linebackers coach, Brian Gene Mary, which is those two are the holdovers. Safeties coach, George Hilo, and defensive backs coach and co-defense coordinator, Maurice Linguist. So offense, you still got Gaddis calling plays and coaching receivers. I believe who's the O-line coach? I just saw it. It's blanking here. Hold on, I'm sorry. I'm gonna be stubborn here to figure this out. Tight ends coach Sharon Moore will now coach the offensive line. That's what I thought I saw a shift in that. So Moore moves over from tight ends to the offensive line. So that's from the Detroit Free Press on January 25th from Orion Strong is the reporter on that. Rob, I mean, you can shuffle the deck as much as you want, but until we see the results on the field, there's not going to be a lot of satisfaction in Ann Arbor, and that's just the sad truth.
Yeah, it really is. And we haven't really seen, nothing that will tell us different so far. I mean, and I tell you what, you got to beat Ohio State. That's the start right there. If you beat Ohio State, that buys you some time and you can, worry about, the national championship a couple of years down the line. But beating Ohio State is definitely the start.
All right. That's good look into the Michigan program. We'll do a deeper dive on Michigan. We'll try to get some Michigan folks on to talk about it. We do have UCF reporter Jeff Sharon coming on next week to talk about the Gus Malzahn hire. But we're going to dip into that a little bit tonight. We're going to go over all the new coaches at FBS programs. There's 15 changes at the FBS level. And Rob, we're going to make it a short segment for each, but you're going to go thumbs up, thumbs down, or shrug. Okay, on the hire. All right. So the first one, Josh Heupel at UCF exits the door at UCF. They bring in the Gus Malzahn. A little bit of a surprise, in my opinion. I thought that when they were first mentioned in the name, I thought, well, that's like a lazy connection because he lost the Auburn job and what? I mean, he's a good coach and everything, but like, and hey, Auburn right now in the Nick Saban era, it's got to be like that's one of the toughest jobs in America right now. Not sure if you saw the press conference where a reporter from Orlando, West 2 News, asked if Gus Malzahn was ready to handle the pressure cooker of this job at UCF. Yeah, you laughed. Most people laughed. Gus actually answered it straightforward. Well, I think I can it's like, dude, the guy coached at Auburn.
Yeah. I don't
handle it.
I don't think it's that much pressure to coach at UCF.
No, compared to Auburn, no. But hey, UCF, it's a pretty high standard. You're competing for the conference title in all seriousness, though. But I mean, you walk in the door, you inherit Dylan Gabriel, who I think he's one of the best returning quarterbacks in the country. If you're Gus Malzahn, the guy's probably going to rip it and have a lot of fun down there this season at UCF. I think they'll be highly successful, at least in year one. My concern with him is long-term. He got up there and said all the right things at his press conference. He said, this is top 20 job in America. We're determined to make the playoff. He said all the right things that UCF fans want to hear. But do you see Gus actually sticking around? 5 years from now, is Gus the head coach at UCF is basically my question.
Well, before I answer that, I'm gonna go back to the actual little game we were playing. So I'm gonna go ahead and give a thumbs up for the hire for Gus Malzahn. But to answer your question, I do not see Gus Malzahn sticking around past 5 years at UCF. I think he's going to do an outstanding job while he's there, and which is going to springboard him into getting another, top tier job. So I can see that happening before he, stays 5 years plus at UCF.
Tell me NC State wouldn't hire him 2 years from now or somewhere else. I mean, like, he's going to get another opportunity somewhere at a big level because he's going to crush it at UCF. I'm with you. I'm gonna give it a thumbs up overall. I like the hire. Like, Orlando seems pretty pumped about it too. That's kind of like swayed me a little bit. They just seem very fired up. And arguably, did you upgrade from Josh Heupel?
Most definitely. I tell you what, I know Gus Malzahn gets a lot of slack because, he hasn't won, the national championship that much. I mean, I think they won one under his tenure.
When he was an OC.
He was the OC with Cam Newton.
Yeah.
And that was Gene Chizik as the head coach.
They made it his first year.
And then they made it his first year. So and I think they lost that one to Oregon.
FSU.
Florida State. Yep. That was Jameis Winston's team. So I really think Gus Malzahn is a great coach. I mean, we saw that, he can coach on the high school level. We saw that he can coach on the collegiate level, in Auburn on a top tier level. He has an all-time winner record, and he has an all-time winner record in the SEC. So he's above 500 all time and above 500 in the SEC. So I think that counts for a lot right there.
Well, the man he's replacing followed UCF athletic director up to Tennessee. Josh Heupel replaces Jeremy Pruitt. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I got pretty fired up on that episode, but hey, Tennessee is a mess right now. And we talked about the fact that they got to play Alabama every year right now, Florida, Georgia. Like, they haven't they're like on an 18-game collective losing streak to all these schools, lost 14 of 15 to Florida, 14 in a row to Alabama, like 9 of 11 to Georgia. They are in no place to think that they are as pretty as they are. They can be pretty, but they've been struggling. They're down, and they're going to take some time. But the position they've struggled with, quarterback, they've struggled with the offense. Even if they're losing, I think Tennessee's going to be a heck of a lot more fun to watch. Do I think Heupel is going to necessarily be there 5 years from now? I don't know, but I think, is he at least a good hire for today to replace Pruitt and elevate the program to where even if he goes 7-6 a few years from now and he gets shown the door in year 3, I think it's going to be a much more attractive job when he leaves than when he's coming in. And so for that reason, I'm giving Heupel a thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm giving, Heupel to Tennessee a thumbs up as well. I think he comes in, he actually opens up the offense a little bit more. Pruitt kind of really didn't open it up as much. He's coming from that Alabama tree where you just want to play good defense and kind of, ground and pound and run the ball. But, in this day and age, you're going to have to open it up, give the ball to your playmakers. And I think, Josh Heupel is going to come in and do that right away. And he's younger, so I think he'll be able to do a better job of connecting with the younger kids and just the culture out there that's going on right now. So I like this hire from Tennessee. And to quote Gus Malzahn in regards to saying UCF is a top 20 job, even though Tennessee right now is a dumpster fire, it's still a top 20 job. I mean, anytime you can put 100 plus in the stands, that atmosphere, you're playing in the SEC, you're getting top talent recruits year in and year out. I think you can be competitive and you can compete. So Tennessee is still a top 20 job, even though, it's a dumpster fire.
I don't know if it's a top 20 job right now, but it should be. I'll go with that. It should be a top 20 job. I mean, you're right. The environment and everything, there's no reason they should be as bad as they are. But I think Heupel, they'll at least pick it up. Good points there, Rob. But let's go to Marshall. out of Conference USA. They parted ways with Doc Holliday after the season. I mean, I think at one point, weren't they like 7-0, and then they lost their last 2 games? They lost the Conference USA championship, but they had some really weird, like 20-0 loss to Rice out of nowhere. They ended up replacing the Alabama assistant running backs coach, Charles Huff. And Huff at one point was mentioned for the Vanderbilt job before the Clark Lea hire. They talk about Huff being a great recruiter, but a lot of people at Alabama are great recruiters. I think on paper this seems like a good hire, but Holliday was 85-54, had a good thing going. This almost feels like maybe both sides got tired of each other and just decided to make a change. So for that reason, I don't know if Marshall's necessarily that much better off. Maybe new blood helps, and Huff will be hungry to prove himself, and it ends up being a great move. But I give it a shrug for now. I'm on the shrug side for now. I think Huff could be a good coach, but Marshall was already pretty good with Doc Holliday, so I don't know how much better it could get with Charles Huff unless he makes like a New Year's Six bowl.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm gonna do the shrug as well. Just like you said, I don't know how better Marshall can get with this hire. Maybe Huff coming in, if he's the recruiter that, people say that he is, and he can kind of get those top tier talent, or maybe he can, crack the transfer portal like we talked about previously, and he can kind of get some of those guys that maybe got recruited to Alabama, but, just like Duke Huntley, maybe from an academic standpoint, didn't have the grades to kind of get in right now, had to go to junior college and work their way back. Maybe Huff can get those guys and, take that Marshall program to the next level. But for right now, I'm going to give it a shrug as well.
Let's go out to Texas. Tom Herman is let go after 4 seasons at Texas. Hey, I think the Herman era can be summed up as, whereas I would say Charlie Strong, which disappointed the hell out of me because I love Charlie Strong. I mean, we just talked about his Florida days and everything. Charlie Strong, great dude. Bummed out it didn't work out for him at Texas, but we thought Herman, if we were doing this segment 4 years ago, we would have been like 2 thumbs up on Herman. Like Herman looked to be a home run hire. He was the hottest coaching candidate in America. LSU, Texas are fighting over him. And hey, close but not quite during his tenure, right? They played Texas. They play head to head with Oklahoma, who's dominant throughout Herman's time at Texas. They play head to head with Oklahoma, and then they turn around and need like overtime to beat like Kansas State the next week. So they never had any type of consistency with him. Never could quite get it off the ground on that level. So they bring in Alabama offensive coordinator Steve Sarkesian. Sarkesian, previous head coach at Washington and USC, Broyles Award winner for the nation's top assistant at Alabama this past season. Obviously, that Bama offense was cooking, but I was very what when I saw this move, because Sarkesian, we've seen him in action. Like, he's an okay head coach, but everyone thinks that Nick Saban just turns you to gold. And we've seen time and time again, just like with Bill Belichick, that's not necessarily the case, right? In the NFL, we've seen it. Some guys are okay, but Sarkesian, I was almost swayed on the hire when I heard an interview with him. He talked about his issues with alcohol at USC, and he talked about how he grew as a person from it. And I got to tell you, on a human being level, I am rooting for Steve Sarkesian to do great at Texas. Because if he can turn that thing around, get Texas jump started, all gas, no brakes. If he gets that thing going out in Austin, first off, college football is better when Texas is good, because they're freaks out there in Texas. Love having them like really into it in the national title race. They should be a playoff contender on a regular basis, just like Oklahoma. But secondly, like, it's just a great personal story if he gets it together. That being said, Rob, I want to give. I know everybody's excited about it now, and I don't mean to rain on anybody's parade here, but I'm going to give it a shrug. I'm going to give it a shrug because I do think he can do better than Herman. He may very well do better than Herman, but I think right now we're just super excited about a guy that got to play. When you get to play with Nick Saban's offense and Nick Saban's toys, you feel like you're pretty good. It's almost like if you like got to use like, if Tiger Woods let you borrow his golf clubs for an afternoon and then you went back to using your like $20 putter a week ago. I don't know. It's a bad example maybe, but it's just you're playing with Nick Saban's toys at the end of the day. We've seen offensive coordinators come and go and take jobs. Jim McElwain with Alabama, like it's no guarantee.
Yeah, it really sounds like you're raining on my parade right now, Nick, because I'm actually one of those fans who's I'm going to give this 2 thumbs up. I love this hire by Texas, Steve Sarkesian. I think he's more than just an average coach. I think he has a great football mind, and just like you mentioned, he has battled with the alcoholism and everything, and facing his demons. So he's seen the top of the top, and he's seen the bottom of the bottom. So I think he's in a good mental space right now. He has all the things that he needs to do a good job at Texas. The facilities are top notch. The state of Texas, the athletes out there, he can have the pick of the litter. He really don't even have to leave the state to recruit. He has that Alabama, resume on that Alabama pedigree on his resume saying, hey, this is what I did with, Mac Jones and Devontae Smith. Hey, I have a Heisman Trophy winner under my belt. He can go back, even talk about, hey, I have the relationship with Lane Kiffin. I have the relationship with Pete Carroll. So I think this is a great hire for Texas. And I think Steve Sark is definitely going to change, the tide in Texas and, get Texas back on the map again, because they really haven't been relevant in years.
I hope you're right, because I heard an interview with him. I forget where it was, but he was excellent. And I was like, damn, I'm ready to go sign up and play for Texas after listening to that. So I'm rooting for the guy, but all those factors you said were the same factors with Tom Herman, right? Those players are there. The facilities are there. Texas always has money. That's so I'm going to play skeptical on that. Good. I like a little disagreement though. I like a little disagreement on that. That's fine. That's good for the show. So Sark, we're divided on Sark. Let's go to Boise State, where Bryan Harsin ends up leaving the Broncos, resigning to take the Auburn job. He replaced Chris Peterson in 2014 after Peterson left for Washington. He led the Broncos to 3 Mountain West championships. By any means, great replacement. I mean, Peterson's tough act to follow. Great follow-up act. Boise goes out and hires Oregon defensive coordinator, a former Boise State player, I believe. And he had the same defensive coordinator role under Harsin at one point. Oregon defensive coordinator Andy Avalos comes home to Boise State. And, he was a Broncos DC from 2016 to 2018 before going to Oregon. I like it. Homegrown. Same deal with Harsin. Brought him home. He was a homegrown guy too. So keep it in the program. Boise State, they got a good thing cooking. I don't know a ton about Avalos, but I know that Boise State seems to have a good eye for football coaches. They got a good setup there out in the Mountain West right now. And I'm going to give this hire a thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go opposite of you again, Nick. I'm going to give this hire a thumbs down, and maybe – the audience out there can't see it. So let me give the other hand a thumbs down. But I really thought the guy that they tried to hire that they didn't get a chance to hire was Kellen Moore, homegrown, fresh from the program. I thought that would have been a home run hire. So they tried to go out and get him, but he turned down the job. And I really just don't like this hire. After not getting Kellen Moore, it kind of felt like, hey, let's just hire anyone at this point. So that's the feeling that I'm getting right now. So don't know too much about Avalo, but I really thought Kellen Moore. I wanted to see Kellen Moore back at his alma mater.
That seemed to be the common thought when the job opened. Apparently he interviewed for it, right? And it just
he didn't take it. Yeah.
All right, Jay Hobson's out at Southern Miss. By the way, we're gonna save Harsin and Auburn for last because Auburn's just good conversation at any time. Jay Hobson, Southern Miss, was out, and they bring in Will Hall, offensive coordinator for Tulane the last 2 seasons. 40 years old. Hall was 56-20 over 6 combined seasons with West Alabama and West Georgia in the Gulf South Conference. So Hall's an up-and-coming guy. Had some interesting offenses there in Tulane. That Tulane team's been a lot of fun to watch. Man, between the uniforms and that up-tempo offense the last 3 years with Willie Fritz, Tulane's like one of those games, if it's like late night Saturday night or something or slow afternoon, I could catch a Tulane game. I usually try to watch them. But Will Hall, I think this is a great fit with Southern Miss. I love seeing these schools, these mid-tier schools, go out and hire like a young guy like this, especially proven track record with a 56-20 win record in 6 seasons at West Alabama, West Georgia. He's got a couple seasons in the FBS to get his feet wet with recruiting and everything. All of it, Georgia, West Georgia, West Alabama, and New Orleans. You're all in that range there with Southern Miss, so he knows the area very well. Will Hall, big time thumbs up. This might be the best hire of the group I've seen so far.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm gonna give this a thumbs up as well, and all for the same reasons that you mentioned. He knows the area from a recruiting standpoint, and he has a proven track record. I know he's young, but just like I said about Josh Heupel, you kind of want to bring in that, that young head coach nowadays, because, they can kind of keep up with the culture and keep up with the younger student athletes, because we know it's about social media. And I know Nick Saban is hitting the curve and finally coming around to it. But one thing Saban can lean on is, hey, we win. So if you want to win, you come to Alabama. I don't think you really have to give too many recruiting pitches. But we saw
that in the Leach recruiting pitch, didn't we?
We did. But for the young up and coming coaches, I think they can relate a little bit more with the younger athletes. So I like this hire. So I'm definitely giving this a thumbs up.
40 years old at Southern Miss, a school that's won plenty in the past. I feel like the last decade's been really weird with them. They're either really down or they're really competitive, but that's a school growing up. They were 9-10 wins a lot of years. They had a lot of good players come through there, but they had if you get Southern Miss cooking, he'll be an SEC candidate 2-3 years from now. He will. I will Hall. I expect that to be an SEC name at some day. Gary Anderson out at Utah State. Another weird exit. I hope this guy. I'm not sure what's up with the weird exits with this guy here, but he after the opening game, like, just dips out on the team. He did the same thing to Oregon State a couple years ago, I believe. Like, just weird stuff. So the Aggies, they go out and they hire Blake Anderson, who had spent the last 7 seasons at Arkansas State as their next coach. He was 51-37 with the Red Wolves. I'm gonna go thumbs down on this hire. I like Anderson overall. Like, he's an okay guy. But Arkansas State, he was there for 7 years. Before he got there, that thing was a revolving door. It was like Gus Harsin was there. They were losing guys. I think they lost guys like 3 years in a row. And Butch Jones, don't think Butch Jones is staying that long there in Jonesboro, Arkansas. He's going to be out in a year or two. But Arkansas State is a great jumping off point for a lot of jobs. It's been proven. And that guy sat there for 7 years. So I think that should kind of say something maybe about like his appeal nationally on that. Utah State, they've had a couple of good years. Gary Anderson did some okay things with the program the first time around, couldn't get it going the second time around. And I think the hire, I think you're settling if you're Utah State. I'd rather see some new blood come in. Give some new blood a shot.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. I'm gonna give this hire a thumbs down, and the reason why I say that is because I kind of feel like this is a lateral move. Arkansas State to Utah State.
Agreed.
Normally, if you're a coach coaching on that level, you kind of want to make the jump to a Power 5 conference school or something like that, or something close to it. And I kind of feel like this is a lateral move, and just like you said, Arkansas State has been a carousel for head coaches in the last decades. So I really just don't like this hire at all.
Yeah. So we're on the same page with that one. All right. One of the saddest firings of last season for me personally, Will Muschamp at South Carolina. I love Will Muschamp. Did not love his teams at Florida all the time, but I thought Carolina was such a good fit for the guy. Stay patient, have some killer defenses. You guys can deal with some of that offense stuff, but what did he do differently at South Carolina that he did at Florida? Almost nothing. Did it look like a guy learned his lesson? But the interesting thing is they had 5-star quarterback Gunnar Stockton committed, and I know that South Carolina seemed ready to make a move, and they had their guy out there. It seemed like that guy, I think their new coach here, we'll talk about in a sec, was heavily targeted. But if you hold on to Will Muschamp and you bring in 5-star quarterback Gunnar Stockton next year, I don't know. That might be just the jump Will Muschamp needs. like where he could put on a defense. I mean, you're still producing. Even they got J.C. Horn. They got some good defender. Kinlaw. I mean, you watch the tape on that South Carolina defense. They got some ballers on that defensive side. It's just Muschamp just really has struggled to figure out the offensive side of the ball. And if you brought in, you kept Bobo and brought in that 5-star quarterback next year, it would have been interesting to see. But we'll never get to see it because Muschamp, they're paying him a big buyout. He's out the door. And I believe he's an analyst with Georgia now, which going home, I guess that's where he graduated from. Oklahoma assistant Shane Beamer, son of Frank Beamer, comes over. But hey, like I know that's always going to be the first line after the guy's name is son of Frank Beamer, but coach under Spurrier at South Carolina from 2007 to 2010, really knows Columbia, knows the program well. He worked at Georgia under Kirby. He worked under his father at Virginia Tech, and he worked at Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley. So you get to see how Georgia recruits. You get to see how Oklahoma plays offense. Young guy, exciting guy. If I would have said, what should you replace Will Muschamp with at South Carolina? Well, I would have said keep Will Muschamp. But if you would have told me what they should replace him with if they did move on, I'd say a young head coach who's offensive minded. I would have preferred some head coaching experience, but sometimes the business is what it is. Your last name is Beamer. You're going to get your first gig is a SEC job. Congratulations. But honestly, I don't think this is pure nepotism. I don't think this is purely because his resume is stellar. He's got a stellar resume. I'm excited to see what he can do with it if he can get some offense going there in Columbia, Rob.
Once again, I'm giving this a thumbs up higher. And just like you said, you mentioned, to kind of be groomed under Frank Beamer. We know, Beamer ball. We know, he's going to come out and play good special teams, and we know he's going to play good defense. And then, just seeing how Spurrier conduct himself on the offense side of the ball and being with Lincoln Riley as well. So I think he has all the recipes for success, and, he knows the area. And I tell you what, South Carolina is definitely a hot recruiting bed for some talent coming out of there. That South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia area, that triangle of states right there that's kind of bunched together. I think you can get a lot of talent out of that. And when Spurrier was there, he got a lot of talent out of it. For example, Jadeveon Clowney, he was a South Carolina guy. So I think you can definitely get those type of recruits. And look at Dabo Swinney out there in Clemson. So he's definitely getting some recruits out of South Carolina. So if Shane Beamer can kind of steal some of those recruits, I think, South Carolina be good moving forward.
My biggest concern with Beamer is you're dealing with Florida program that's rising back to its height. Georgia's at its height, basically. It's almost playing the best football it's played in its history, outside of maybe the Herschel Walker years. And Tennessee is not going to be down forever. Also, on the other side, right now, the way the SEC works, your annual crossover opponent is Jimbo Fisher and the Texas A&M Aggies. That's minimum 3 losses right there before you even start the season, in my opinion. I mean, like Tennessee, I think the goal is to stay ahead of Tennessee right now if you're South Carolina. But, hey, South Carolina doesn't beat Tennessee every year, even since they've been down. Tennessee, that's a pretty even rivalry right there. But if you're South Carolina, what can you really expect in all seriousness? Because that was my problem with letting Muschamp go. It's not that you don't aspire to something. It's that realistically, how often should you expect to compete for Atlanta if you're a South Carolina Gamecocks fan?
Wow, that's a good question. And I tell you what, we saw Will Muschamp knock off Georgia, not this past year, but the year before. Mm-hmm. So we seen Steve Spurrier rack up double-digit wins. So this South Carolina program is very capable of, being in the national spotlight. And I think they have the talent in the state, and they have the recruiting acumen to kind of get the players in to kind of compete with the Florida Georgias, the Texas A&M of the world. But
I didn't even mention that you play Clemson every year too.
Yes, but realistically,
4 losses
for South Carolina to compete, I just don't see them competing at least for the next 4 years.
But I'm saying you could be perfect against the rest of the schedule, and you still got to play Clemson, Georgia, Florida, A&M, all top 10 programs right now. Like, what do you want from this program right now? Like, it's going to take a couple of years, I think, for Beamer to get it going. And the thing with Spurrier, let's be honest with ourselves, guys. Georgia was going through a change from Rick to Smart. Florida was down mired in the McElwain and Muschamp eras. Like, it was not good. And South Carolina benefited. Clemson wasn't Clemson yet either. They were still beating them. Spurrier was still whooping on Clemson. It's just a different day right now, man. It's a different day in Columbia, and you got to give Beamer some time. You kind of gave up. I would have given Will Muschamp another year or two to figure it out, another couple of years. And when I say figure it out, I mean, like, your goal for South Carolina, I think, should be an 8-win season every single year. 7-8 wins every single year, no excuses. But once every 5-6 years, you're competing for Atlanta. That's about it. Because you talk about beating Georgia. How many times they beat Florida and Georgia in the same season?
Yeah, not too many. And I think that's
realistic.
I think, your take on it, Nick, is definitely, not to say that you're a South Carolina fan, but I think you're a realistic, just fan in general in regards to South Carolina competing for Atlanta. So you want to have those seasons where, okay, we're not competing for the SEC championship, but at least we knocked off Florida. At least we knocked off Georgia. At least we knocked off A&M or Tennessee. You got to have some type of big time win under your belt in a down year. Right. And, in a good year, I mean, it's a good year, clearly, if you're, competing for the SEC championship. So I think, being realistic, I don't see South Carolina competing for the SEC championship for at least 4 years.
Yeah, 3-4 years minimum.
3-4 years minimum.
Which means patience.
Got to be patient.
And, oh, by the way, Clemson's still there. So hope that Dabo leaves at some point. I don't know, man. It's a tough situation in Gamecock land right now, which is a shame because they got great fans. They're loyal. They're great fans up there. So give the guy some time. Beamer's young. Let him build a program. Like, I'm telling you, if I'm the AD there, unless he's a total disaster, in my head, Beamer's getting 7 years at least. Like, that's how dedicated you need to be to this hire. Like, you didn't go out and get a proven guy. Give this guy 7 years, otherwise it's not really fair, in all honesty. But these guys make a lot of money. Screw fairness. Let's go on to Vanderbilt. This is a program you and I are super excited about, Rob. Not necessarily because we think they're going to be competing for Atlanta, but just because they're doing some different things. Derek Mason is out. I love the Derek Mason hire, by the way, when they hired him, Stanford defensive coordinator. Fiery dude. Almost fought Dan Mullen on the field a couple years ago. Like, underrated personality in the SEC. I like Derek Mason. I'm going to miss him. But he's actually at Auburn right now as a DC, so he didn't leave the SEC. But Clark Lea comes in from Notre Dame, former Vandy player. He played fullback there, 38 years old. Notre Dame defensive coordinator the last 3 seasons. Obviously, the Irish ended up making a run to the playoffs this year, had a pretty solid defense, top 15 scoring defense each of the last 3 years. We talked about the Barton Simmons GM type role. Hey, you got a young guy, up-and-coming coach. This is exactly who I want to see at Vanderbilt. Defensive-oriented, though. Hopefully he took some notes from Notre Dame, so he knows how to recruit at a high-level academic school. Look, I mean, the guy played at Vanderbilt. Barton Simmons was living in Nashville, knows the backyard. Maybe he gets – this is a school we talked about Texas State going down their list. If you're Vanderbilt and you can nail some 3-star recruits, get a couple of 2-star guys that with some upsides, maybe some like guys with some size that can grow into NFL bodies 4 or 5 years from now. Like, really, you invest it in the weight room and everything and pick up a couple good transfers every year. And we can see Vandy, we saw it under Franklin. It's possible to be a bowl team and be competitive. Mason did it a couple times. If you're Vanderbilt, the goal is 6-6 in a bowl game every year. I think Clark Lea could get it done. And I give this hire a big thumbs up. I'm a big fan of this hire.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm all for the new blood, the new young blood getting a shot at it. and growing with the program. I think right now we live in this microwave society where we bring in a coach and we want results right then and there. But, certain stops, it takes time. And, everyone's not Clemson. Everyone's not Alabama, Ohio State. So it's going to take a little bit longer. But just like you said, you have to be competitive and you have to compete. So 5 to 6 wins year in, year out for Vanderbilt, that I think that's good. And if you're competing, I just don't see Vanderbilt ever competing for, the SEC championship. No. But at the end of the day, if you're, just like I said, in that South Carolina boat, if you're knocking off, Vanderbilt knocked off Florida one year. So we saw that upset. If Vanderbilt can kind of, have those upsets every other year and kind of be competitive week in and week out, I think that's a win for this program and for this fan base.
Yeah, I mean, is it unrealistic for Vandy to get to 3 wins in the SEC each year? I don't think so. I think you can get to that point. And if you could schedule favorably in the non-conference, schedule 3 or 4 wins in the non-conference, schedule get those fight like hell for those 2 to 3 wins in the SEC. You got a bowl team every year. And if you could be bowling at Vandy, you're doing something good. So let them get tired of you going 6-6 at Vandy. But I'll tell you what, you go 6-6 a few times at Vandy, you might be out of there somewhere else. They might hire you somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, hey, I think I'm very interested to see what that staff does up there. The South Alabama Jaguars, they end up letting go of Steve Campbell, who had come over from Central Arkansas, a great FCS program with the purple field. They couldn't quite duplicate this success, though. Had a couple of tight games this season. They were a fun team early on when not many teams were playing. Those first couple of weeks of September, I watched a couple of South Alabama games. They played some tight ones there. But the Jaguars, they end up going to Indiana defensive coordinator Kane Wommack, who's only 33 years old. And he was South Alabama's defensive coordinator in 2016 and 17. He's now the youngest head coach in the FBS. Wommack to South Alabama. It's a young program. Get a young guy in there. You were just down there at the stadium in Mobile, recruiting rich area, but a lot of good programs around, so it's tough to say. So I like the Womack hire, but overall, I'm going to give it a shrug because I'm not sure. The South Alabama program hasn't shown me anything yet, so I'm not going to get too excited about it until I can see it, and that's not projecting ahead like we should be doing. On paper, I get the hire, but the guy was there a few years ago as defensive coordinator, and you weren't that great. I don't know. What's different?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm gonna give this one a shrug as well. I'm all for, just like I mentioned before, I'm all for, the new blood coming in there and getting a crack at it. 33 years old. He has time to grow with the program. He's familiar with the landscape. He was there as a defensive coordinator. Just like you mentioned earlier, I was down there for the Senior Bowl in Mobile. So the stadium, nice atmosphere. So he definitely has stuff to work with. So we're going to see moving forward, if he can kind of stick around and carve out a name for himself from a head coaching standpoint.
Louisiana-Monroe, they end up firing Matt Viator after 5 seasons. Warhawks end up going 0-10 in 2020. UL Monroe brings in Terry Bowden, which I'm not sure many people saw that coming. But Bowden, who somehow is only 64 years old. I thought he was much older than that. I thought he was well into his 70s, but he's 64. Last coach at Akron from 2012 to 2018. Obviously coached at Auburn in the 90s. He has a good record. He's 82 and 69-1 as FBS head coach. But he brings in Rich Rodriguez to coach his son at quarterback. Rich Rodriguez's son transfers in from Arizona. It's a lot of flashy names, but I'm gonna give this one a big thumbs down. I'm not super stoked about the Terry Bowden area at Monroe, Louisiana. Not fired up.
I'm actually gonna give this one a thumbs up, and the reason why is because I don't think he's gonna stick around, for a long duration of time. But just to kind of come back in and get the program, settled down and kind of get the program moving in the right direction. He's been there, done that. He's been around college football for pretty much his whole life. So I think he can kind of change the culture and get the program moving in the right direction. So I like this hire.
Let's go to Arkansas State, where Blake Anderson, like I said, 51-37, ends up going to Utah State. He resigned from Arkansas State to accept that Utah State job. He did leave Arkansas State to 6 bowl games and 2 conference championships, so we got to give him credit there. But it's like we said, why didn't he get that opportunity elsewhere? I'm not sure. I know he had the situation with his wife where his wife ended up dying of breast cancer, I believe. Maybe that kind of kept his family in one spot a little longer. I don't know, so it's not fair to speculate too much on that. Looking back on that, I was just remembering that from a couple of years ago when they played Georgia, they honored her. But Arkansas State, they end up hiring Alabama assistant coach Butch Jones, which I'm so glad I don't have to look at Butch Jones during Alabama games anymore. But Jones, obviously well known from his Tennessee stop, where as much as we want to crush the guy, 34-27 over 5 seasons. Very successful at Central Michigan and Cincinnati before he got to Tennessee at 84-54. Hey, Butch is not the most exciting name overall, but if you're Arkansas State, I think this is a hell of a hire coming off of Blake Anderson, the Blake Anderson years. I think he gets that. It's not because he breathes the same air as Saban. I just think he proved himself at Cincinnati, he proved himself at Central Michigan, and Tennessee's a mess. I'm not going to entirely blame Butch Jones on Tennessee. So I think he's culpable, but I would give him partial blame for his Tennessee years. So Arkansas is familiar with the territory down there for recruiting. I think this is a strong candidate. It'd be interesting to say who's going to be at their school longer, Butch Jones at Arkansas State or Gus at UCF. Because I think Butch is one and done at Arkansas State, and he's taking the first P5 job that calls him.
And with that being said, that's why I say I'm going to go thumbs down on this hire. And we talked about Arkansas State being a, head coaching carousel, year in and year out for coaches coming in and leaving. Blake Anderson was probably the longest tenured head coach there for the last decade or so. With that being said, Butch Jones it just seems like he gets a job every other 3 years, and he kind of, flames out and he gets fired or he resigns or whatever the case may be, and then he pops back up again. I would have definitely liked to see Arkansas State go with the younger head coach and kind of have a head coach coming up in the ranks and kind of grow with the program. So with that being said, thumbs down on Butch Jones, Arkansas State.
You're almost making me regret my thumbs up. You almost swayed me with that, but I got to stick with it. Can't take it back. Kevin Sumlin's gone from Arizona. This one shocked me. I thought he was going to be a good fit at Arizona running that offense, but man, he lost his juice. He lost his fastball, and maybe if he goes back, talk about a good candidate for the Saban school of coaches right there. He could easily become a name that I think could resurface at some point, because those Manziel teams, he ran some good offenses at Texas A&M and Oklahoma before he got there. Houston too, right?
Yeah,
hey, that's 2 Houston coaches that imploded on the next stop, by the way, with him and Herman, right? So anyway, someone doesn't work out of Arizona. As a matter of fact, it's extra worse because the guy that everyone laughed at when they hired Herm Edwards is building a nice little program out in Tempe. And Arizona laid a 70-7 smackdown on the Wildcats this year. Good stuff out of Herm Edwards there, but too much for them to take after 3 seasons with someone. Time for them to make a change. They did it. They end up hiring. I was very surprised with this hire, Jedd Fisch. And the more I read, because I remember him as a Jaguars fan, he came in as the OC during the Gus Bradley days, and he's been in a couple of low points on his stops. He doesn't have a resume that makes you super stoked on him. He was with New England this past year, offensive assistant with the Rams before that. But man, if this guy has been all around college football, all around the NFL, has a great story of how he got started. I listened to it on the Ryan Russillo podcast a few weeks ago. Great interview with Russillo about his plans for Arizona. The first time head coach. So even though he's at this point, he's an older guy, he's definitely a guy that is ready for this opportunity. He's coached out in the West Coast at UCLA before. He knows every part of the country. Like he's coached in every part of the country. Lots of experience on both the pro level and the college level. I think it's a fantastic hire for Arizona. I wasn't excited about it when I saw it initially, but now that I've looked into it and I've read up on the guy, I'm pretty pumped to see what they can do, because I got to be honest, they're not going to be any worse than they were with Sumlin. So I think this program, even if they can't get over the hump, it's going to trend up with Fisch. Good hire out at Tucson.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Thumbs up. Good hire. First-time head coach, but, what comes with a lot of experience. And I tell you what, you're not trying to compete for national championships out there in Arizona. You're trying to be competitive, and that's what Jedd Fisch is going to come in and do. He's going to come in, change the culture, and be competitive, and that's all that you ask. And of course, you don't want to get beat down 70-7 from your in-state rival as well. So I think he comes in and creates a competitive balance for that state, and can actually kind of go up and compete against the USCs and the Oregons of the world.
Where's Spencer Rattler from? What state? Oklahoma quarterback.
Oklahoma, Spencer Rattler.
Arizona.
Arizona is the Arizona guy.
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name right now. The Iowa State QB. What's the name again?
Brock Purdy.
Brock Purdy, Arizona.
Arizona guy.
Dude, that's what Fisch was talking about in the interview. I don't know how we're letting these guys get out of Arizona. Like, Arizona's got plenty of players. Like, if we kind of keep the good players here in Arizona, that's all we need. And those schools, like, if you get a guy that can recruit like that goes out and is excited about the program. What I like about Jedd Fisch, I'm always cautious with guys who get fired coming in, which we both like the Gus to UCF thing, but I think that's different. I feel like he's getting new life at UCF a little bit, where he's been at Auburn under Saban's thumb for so long. Little different feel. Jedd Fisch coming in here to play Sumlin. Sumlin was like, just ran out of town hard at A&M, and they were just like, enough. Like, we thought you were the guy, you're not. And they ran him out of town. And you almost felt like it just never got off the ground, because even he came in, and the reason I had so much confidence too in him, it wasn't blind faith. Remember a guy by the name of Khalil Tate that was supposed to be a Heisman candidate? I thought that was going to be a great fit for him out there. Didn't work. Doesn't seem like he's recruited all that well out there. If Fisch comes in, has different energy and everything, and I think Arizona's an attractive place. I mean, hell, you get Gronk. Gronk's story for going there is that he went to a pool party. Like, Fisch's coach, he got to start at Florida. He knows how to sell a good spot. So I think Fisch is going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to watching development. And hey, I would love it. There's no reason in my mind Arizona and Arizona State shouldn't be top-level programs year in and year out. There's really not.
Yeah, I mean, just from a geographical location, I think I'm right there with you. I mean, you kind of have California not too far from you. And actually, we've been seeing a lot of talent come out of the Nevada area more recently. So right there. And then you got Texas not too far away. So I think if you're a head coach at Arizona State, I think you should be competitive year in and year out.
All right, two more, Rob. Lovie Smith in Illinois part ways on after 5 seasons in Champaign. I was disappointed in this, because I thought Lovie was building. He got dealt a really bad hand coming in, and they were patient with him, and it feels like it paid off with a bowl bid last year. Couple upsets along the way. They ended up losing in the bowl game to Cal. But I think if you give Lovie, like, I think this 2020 season, it's just kind of like, I don't like that this was the year you decided on something with him. But they made the move. You know, I would like to see someone like Lance Leopold from Buffalo get this job. But they go out and they bring in Bret Bielema, which I think you can already tell my reaction to this. I'm a big thumbs down. This is the biggest thumbs down hire I have of the entire cycle. But if you're an administrator at Illinois and you're not a big football guy, and Bret Bielema comes in and says, guess what? I've won 3 Big Ten titles. I know how to win the Big Ten West. I coached at Wisconsin, which, by the way, is a very good football school. And we're going to build a big physical team that hits people and plays competitive football. You're probably like, oh yeah. I could see Bielema selling the hell out of himself in a room. But if you have a freaking brain, you know he won those Big Ten titles when Ohio State was going through NCAA issues, right? And then he leaves Wisconsin, which is a perfect freaking job for him, goes to Arkansas because they pay more money, and then was a total disaster down there in Arkansas and just never adjusted. Talk about a guy like similar to Will Muschamp at 2 stops. We know who Bret Bielema is. Is Bret Bielema going to do anything different at Illinois than he did at Wisconsin or Arkansas? He's going to have to if he's going to win. But I'm not too skeptical of this hire. I'm not too optimistic about this hire. I'm very skeptical of it.
Yeah, and this is the part where we differ at, Nick. I'm going to give this one a thumbs up. And the reason why is we know we talked about Michigan and
I'm stunned right now.
We talked about Michigan and the state of the program in regards to its identity and not having the identity. You're right. We know what Bret Bielema is going to do. We know he's going to play, smash mouth football. He's going to run again. So we know that. But at the end of the day, if you can do that at a high level in the Big Ten, I think you can be competitive. And we see Wisconsin do that. And I mean, the only thing that Wisconsin has been missing is, being able to open it up and being able to throw the ball downfield. Now, Bret Bielema can do that. I think he's going to do tremendously well in the Big Ten. I don't think he was going to do well in the SEC because of the style of play that he plays with. It's going to work coming across certain teams, but it's not going to work coming across Alabama, because if Alabama knows you're one-dimensional coming into the game, then you might as well just forfeit the game. But I think you can be one-dimensional in the Big Ten and still get away with it for majority of the season until you come up and you meet the Ohio States, the Wisconsins of the world. Then you're going to have to open it up. So I think I like this hire, Bret Bielema to Illinois.
I just worry. Do you think he's evolved?
I don't think he's involved as a head coach. I think, he's going to continue to lean on the running game, but I think he doesn't have to completely evolve. I think he has to evolve when he comes across certain teams, which is going to be the Ohio States, the Michigans and the Wisconsins of the world. Right. And if he does that, that means he's competing for the Big Ten championship.
Well, and you can't worry about that right now, in fairness. Like, I think right now your approach at Illinois is Illinois is one of those programs that might be the most underachieving program in America. I'm not sure why they're not a bowl team year in and year out. It's a resource-rich program. They have plenty of money at that program. It's not. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I'd like to learn more. Maybe we should do an episode on Illinois on that. But I would love to learn more about them. But we've seen them have good teams. I mean, we've seen great players come through there, especially, back in the 90s, Kevin Hardy, Simeon Rice. They had some real ball players come through there, and we just haven't seen that level of talent go through there in years. And I'm not sure Bret Bielema, like, we're going to rough them up, like, type of style is, like, the answer. Man, if I'm Illinois, I want a fun style of football. Give me a wide open football that we might lose to Ohio State, but we're going to lose 65-35. And we're going to put up 42. We're going to put up 42 on this team. And we're going to be a nightmare for Purdue. And we're going to be a nightmare for Iowa and these teams like that. But Iowa and Wisconsin already play that style of ball. Hell, Northwestern kind of plays that style in a way, right? So what are you doing that's different? You can even argue Minnesota plays that style. Minnesota's at least a little more open.
Yeah, definitely a little bit more open.
But still physical, run, play defense. That's PJ Fleck, right?
Yeah, I think that's a style that you kind of have to play in that conference. And the reason why I say that is because of the geographic location. You have that cold weather that you can use to your advantage. So when you're playing that smash mouth physical style, I tell you what, I used to love to get physical when I played the game of football, but I tell you, when the temperature dropped, trying to get physical in that temperature, it's a little bit different. So I think, playing that smash mouth football that Bret Bielema is going to play, it's going to wear on teams, and he can kind of grind out the game and win some games that maybe he's not supposed to win, but just because of the physical play and the style of play, he's going to win it. But you can say, hey, he might lose it too, because he's not going to open it up. But let's just give him some time. I know he didn't do good at Arkansas, but we did see what he can do in the running game. So he had a top tier rushing offense in the SEC. So that's saying a lot right there.
Hey man, sounds like that Illinois is gonna be a team we got to bet on. We got to make a preseason bet or something. We got to do that. All right, interesting discussion. Definitely got to do an Illinois episode. Auburn episode just confirmed. We have a writer from 24/7 Sports coming on in a couple weeks with us. Rob, Nathan King covers Auburn for 24/7 Sports. He's going to come on. We're going to do an interview Tuesday, March 2nd with him, all about Auburn, everything about Auburn that you'd want to know, and then some. Gus is out at Auburn. We talked about that to start this conversation with UCF. Bryan Harsin comes in from Boise State. Well, Rob, early on, it sounded like the boosters were really running things. And some guy, I don't know who, but some guy's plan was, we're going to put Kevin Steele in. We're going to fire Gus Malzahn, pay him $21 million to leave, and then hire his defensive coordinator. What? How is that the plan? You're going to spend, how rich are you, by the way, that you could just throw $21 million around like that?
Pretty rich. I tell you that, but that was a horrible plan. I'm glad it didn't work out like that.
I heard some other names along the way too, right? A lot of goofy, like it was a long road before we got to Harsin, is the only point I wanted to make. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. It was definitely a long road, but the whole Kevin Steele thing, hilarious. That just. Yeah, that kind of blew my mind for a second. But I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and give this hire a thumbs down. And the reason why I say that is because, it's Auburn football. You kind of want to go out there and get that splashy hire. You kind of want to go out there and get that coach that can kind of compete against Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher. And then if you look over to the East to compete against Dan Mullen and all of those guys on the East. So with that being said, I do not like this hire at all. And if you're going to make this hire, you might as well just stick with Gus Malzahn. I mean, he actually went and showed you that he can kind of win in the SEC. He's been to the top. He's conquered it. I mean, not as a head coach, but as an offensive coordinator, but he pretty much had his thumb all over that team. So with that being said, I really didn't like this hire at all. You might as well just retain Gus Malzahn and just keep him and not, have the $21 million buyout and bring in another coach. So I didn't like this hire at all.
You only pay a guy $20 million to get the hell out if you know you're getting a guy that's better. And do you have a better coach today?
No.
Or not necessarily worse, by the way, but not like Urban Meyer would be like a clearly like better. Like it'd have to be a name almost on that level because Gus has proven himself. And hey, look, Auburn, let's be real with Gus, up and down and all over the place. And if you're an Auburn fan, there's such thing as relationship fatigue. It's been 7 or 8 years with him, 8 seasons. It's been all over the map. You've been to a national title game. You've missed bowl games. Your quarterback play has been pretty much crap the last several years. He doesn't seem to recruit the quarterback position particularly well either, which is surprising because he runs such a good offense. But Gus really missed big on the Bo Nix recruiting. And like whatever it is, whether it's Bo or whether it's whether it's the system or whether it's Bo, he missed big on that because I think that ultimately cost him the job because I think there's just not a lot of hope with him right now. There's not a lot of hope with this team, and I think that you take away the hope from the fan base, and I think that's why Gus ends up getting canned for $21 million.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's more so. I don't think it's the scheme because we've seen Gus scheme win before. We've seen Gus scheme win a national championship. We've seen Gus scheme, kind of evolve. I mean, he's taken that scheme from high school and brought it to the collegiate level. And actually you can see that, scheme kind of trickle over in the NFL right now too. So I think the scheme is solidified. It's perfect. It's solid. But just like you said, I think that quarterback position is a miss in Bo Nix. And I tell you what, I think, they played the wrong player. If you ask me, I would have went with Joey Gatewood instead of Bo Nix.
I would say that too, but Gatewood couldn't get on the field at Kentucky either. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. So I thought Gatewood was going to be a great fit at Auburn too, but I don't know, man. I don't know. And so that's why I end up I'm gonna go like this. I think Harsin, it's much like the Heupel thing. It's not that Harsin's a worse coach or better. It's just I think Heupel is going to be judged on what he does on the wins and losses, when in reality he should be judged from elevating the program, which is what he's going to do. Heupel is going to elevate Tennessee. Harsin, is he going to elevate Auburn? I don't know. Nick Saban's down the street. Probably not. It's not a great situation to step into, but if I got offered a job where I knew I could potentially get fired with $21 million coming my way, I'd be like, okay, all right, Auburn, what do you want me to? Let's go.
Yeah.
You want me to beat Saban? Sure, let's go.
I can try.
I'll try.
I give my best shot, but don't count on it.
I'll guarantee you I'll do it, and if I don't, you can fire me.
Yeah,
Give me $21 million.
And that's the thing. I really wish Auburn would have stuck with Gus. I know, his kind of career has kind of been up and down. But one thing that you've seen him win on, a national level. You've seen him win, a national championship. You've seen him get back to a national championship, his first year as a head coach. It's talent in that area. He can kind of recruit the players that he needs for the scheme. Look at all the recruits that's been coming out in the draft. You got Big Cat. You have, I'm blanking on some names, but you had a lot of names who made that, transition on the next level, who's playing really, really well. So I don't think it's a lack of talent. I think Auburn kind of can get those guys year in and year out from a recruiting aspect, but that quarterback position is key. And I tell you what, it's more so key now than ever, especially when you have the transfer portal being used the way it's being used.
Let me give you the upside of Harsin. It's like you said, portal for quarterback, maybe in a year, maybe get Bo Nix 1 year, work with him for a year, and then portal the quarterback next year. So if you bring in a quarterback and you clean up the offensive line struggled under Gus the last few years, you clean up that offensive line, the defense stays stout. If you win 8-9 games every year at Auburn, that's going to be an improvement on what Gus did. I think Harsin he might not be that big, sexy name you want, but I do think he can bring that level of steadiness. So if you want to be an optimist on the hire, do you have a guy that's going to bring more consistency into your program year to year? Perhaps. You might have nailed it if you're Auburn with that, if that was your criteria. But I think Auburn is first off, everyone shits on Auburn for being crazy, full of crazy people. That's what makes college football great. So I absolutely love the Auburn program for that reason. But that being said, they're a bunch of psychos and they think they're Alabama and they're not. And so if you have to live in that shadow every day, if you have to live in the shadow of it's like you can have a great job and a great degree, but your brother's the doctor who makes $5 million a year. You're never going to be that. Like everywhere else goes, that's a great program. You're doing a good job, but all you care about is your brother.
Yeah,
Life's gonna be tough. Life's gonna be tough.
And that's the thing. And we're going back to the higher thumbs up, thumbs down, or the shrug. And that's why I'm giving it a thumbs down, because ultimately, yeah, you want a head coach to come in and be consistent, but at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is to beat your rival, and your rival is Alabama. So I don't care how consistent you are. If you can't beat Alabama, then this is a bad hire, because you want to hire a coach that's going to go in and go toe-to-toe with Nick Saban. And I just don't think this is it.
I don't know if that guy exists, though. That's the problem. It's a few out there, but even still, you see, like Malzahn did it. Malzahn did it a few times, and then Ogeron, where's he this year? It's not, nobody can do it year to year like Nick. And that's what you see, different programs rise up to challenge, but it's not really the same. I mean, Georgia's probably been the closest to it in terms of a steadiness, but
you got Clemson. Clemson's been pretty
nationally,
steady.
Yeah,
nationally, Clemson, Ohio State. But within the SEC, Georgia and LSU, back and forth.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think we both I think we both agree that Harsin's a good coach, and in almost any other situation, that's a good hire. But because Alabama, it complicates things. Can we at least agree on that with Harsin?
Definitely
Alabama
agree
conquers
on
it.
Alabama complicates a lot of things for a lot of coaches. So don't get me wrong. He's not the first coach that has been succumbed to the Alabama winning streak or under Nick Saban. So but that's just something that you have to deal with, and that's just a hurdle that you have to get over as a head coach going up against Nick Saban. If you want to be one of the elite coaches in the nation, that's something you have to do. You have to beat Nick Saban when you have the chance and the opportunity. And right now, Dabo Swinney is probably one of the coaches that can say, hey, I can go toe to toe with Nick Saban and I'll take my chances.
Yeah, not many of those guys out there though. But
yeah.
Anyway, man, hey, great episode. That was fun. Looking ahead, little look ahead to 2021 with all the new coaches. We are going to have Jeff Sharon on next week to do a deep dive into UCF football. Little Gus Bus action down in Orlando around Disney World there. Looking forward to it, man. Any final thoughts here before we send it out to our sponsor, Coach Paint?
No, send it out for us, Di.
All right, man. We'll send you out these final words from our sponsor, Coach Paint. Thanks for listening to American Football Stories podcast.
American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
Thank you for listening to American Football Stories podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Football Stories. We are working to grow our network on YouTube and we'd love to have you subscribe. You can find us also on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter, at American FB Story, and on our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. I am Robert Parker. My co-host is Nick Knudsen. This has been another episode of American Football Stories.